It's the 15th of June, 2023. I'm Dr. Rajiv Siram. I've just completed my viewing of the press conference by the Prime Minister, Mr. Keith Rowley, and Mr. Tedros, who's the Director General of the WHO, who's visiting Trinidad and Tobago. And the Prime Minister actually swore on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to sign onto the WHO's Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. And this is a pretty remarkable document, together with the IHR, which is backing it, International Health Regulations. And it's a very consequential accord that can have very wide-ranging impacts on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and citizens of the world. And it's not something to take lightly. And I'd like to share some of my insights and basically a hot take, looking at the both the IHR and the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. So I'd like to look at one or two of the articles. And the article, this particular document is entitled the WHO Convention Agreement on Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response. So the WHO Convention Agreement, or WHO CA+, and it's currently in its zero draft form, and it's being examined and deliberated upon by the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. And this document is supposed to be ratified in May 2024. So, in fact, by November, I think, November 2023, governments are supposed to give a preliminary green light on it. And let me read just a few articles within this document. Article 7, Access to Technology Promoting Sustainable and Equitably Distributed Production and Transfer of Technology and Know-how. The parties to this document recognize an inequitable access to pandemic-related products, which is vaccine, therapeutics, and diagnostics, not limited to these, but these should be addressed by increased manufacturing capacity that is more equitably, geographically, and strategically distributed. So this deals with the manufacture, but also distribution. Parties working with through the governing body of the WHO, CA+, shall strengthen existing and develop innovative multilateral mechanisms that promote and incentivize relevant transfer of technologies and know-how for the production of pandemic-related products. Now, what stood out to me about the document is that it is primarily concerned with the access to technology, what it deems pandemic-related products, and in particular vaccines. And it uses the term equitably distributed, equitable, which I feel is a political euphemism for ensuring that the market for these products are as vast as possible for the benefit of the manufacturer. So this document really, in a sense, removes some of the obstacles or hurdles that may impede the distribution of pandemic-related products and uptake of pandemic-related products. But it also defines an inter-pandemic period. So inter-pandemic times, this is point 3 in Article 7, all parties commit to establish mechanisms that shall coordinate, collaborate, facilitate, and incentivize manufacturers to transfer the relevant technology, but also to invest. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here. To invest in the procurement and the access of these products to the local populations. And it talks about equitability, but What is absent to me in this document is really any guidance on the safe or ethical use of products. So in fact, it has almost nothing. It says nothing about the ethical use of these products. And it says it does not address the issue or the question of the use of EUL products and how this should be administered in keeping with basic medical ethics and principles. What it is concerned about, though, Article 8, regulatory strengthening. Number 2, Article 8, each party shall build and strengthen its country's regulatory capacities and performance for timely approval of pandemic-related products. And in the event of a pandemic, accelerate the progress or the process of approving and licensing pandemic-related products for emergency use. Now, my organization, or the organizations to which I belong, which is TTCAN and CTAG, we have done considerable work looking at the ethics behind the use of products like these without voluntary informed consent. But what concerned us principally was the manner in which the national regulatory agencies, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Chemistry, Food and Drug, seem to have been circumvented very easily. In fact, to date, I can't say that we have gotten any measurable guidance from the Chemistry, Food and Drug with regards to these products, not with regards to their safety or even their constitution. This has caused a lot of confusion, I have to say, because we don't have any safety mechanisms in place. So when the WHO is concerned about accelerate approval and licensing, it mentions nothing about the declaration of emergency use status. So truth, voluntary informed consent, which entails the declaration of the true status of the product. And then, of course, that goes into truth in advertising as well. And during the pandemic, we could see clearly that emergency use listed products were falsely marketed as safe and effective. And there was a huge campaign that was coordinated globally and locally and was well funded to drive that particular notion. Now, in fact, one can say that, okay, this was done to promote uptake, but certainly when it was used to try to promote uptake in healthy children, I think that is when they really incurred the ire of the society, and many parents stood up. So regulatory strengthening, I think that's a misnomer, because I think it suggests almost regulatory weakening. Article 18 deals with One Health. The parties to this document, recognizing that the majority of emerging infectious diseases and pandemics are caused by zoonotic pathogens, commit, in the context of pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, and recovery of health systems, to promote and implement a One Health approach. Right. One Health. They seem to have segued this concept in there. The parties recognizing that the majority of emerging infectious diseases and pandemics are caused by zoonotic pathogens. Zoonotic, from animals like bats or pangolins. Now, I don't know how many persons in the know, common sense persons, sensible persons, still believe this. But it would appear as if, from a policy standpoint, national policy standpoint, we are signing on to a treaty that prohibits us from asking any questions about the origins of these pathogens. And I think this is rather unreasonable. Not with the number of data that has emerged, of course, but also even just within the last week, we have persons coming out of the Wuhan that have confirmed that the patient zero was a scientist in the laboratory, which suggests that the pathogen may have originated in the laboratory and could have been a result of gain of function research. So I'm not saying with any certainty, but I am saying that how could we sign on to any treaty that prohibits us from asking or stating the obvious and asking relevant questions about origin? Article 2, relationship with other international agreements and instruments. The implementation of the WHO CA+ shall be guided by the Charter of the United Nations, the Constitution of the World Health Organization, the WHO CA+ and other relevant international instruments, including the international health regulations, should be so interpreted as to be complementary, compatible, and synergistic with the Preparedness Treaty, and should be interpreted in a manner that promotes and supports the implementation and operationalization of the IHR, the International Health Regulations. So let me say that here again. So countries, any party to this treaty, the Pandemic Preparedness Accords, they swear to implement and operationalize the international health regulations. And I think that this is really the crux of this Pandemic Preparedness Accord, or this treaty. It is a way to slip in compliance with the IHR. I'd like to comment on some of the articles within the IHR, because the IHR is being amended as we speak, and that is also being deliberated. Now, the IHR is an instrument that was set up by the WHO to address PHEX, which is pandemic emergencies, right, of international concern, public health emergencies of international concern. So the IHR comes into force, or it is activated when a PHEC is declared. Article 3 on the IHR. The implementations of these regulations shall be with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. That's the original Article 3. In the amended form, dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms has been crossed out. That has been omitted. The new one reads, the implementation of these regulations shall be based on the principles of equity, inclusivity, and coherence. What does that mean? What is inclusivity and coherence? I understand dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedom of persons. Those are tenets of the original UN, the UN that emerged after World War II. That has been removed. Dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedom of the individual, that has been removed and replaced with principles of equity, inclusivity, and coherence. And it goes on to say, in accordance with their common but differentiated responsibilities, taking into consideration social and economic development. So why would the committee that is amending the IHR find it necessary to remove dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms? Determination, Article 12. Determination of a public health emergency of international concern. If the Director General considers, based on the assessment based under these regulations, that a potential, this has been inserted, a potential or actual public health emergency of international concern is occurring, the Director General shall notify all state parties, and seek to consult with the state party in whose territory the event arises regarding this preliminary determination. And then they go on to say that they will seek the view of the Emergency Committee, which is under Article 48. If the Director General determines that the event constitutes a public health emergency of international concern, and the state parties are in agreement regarding this determination. Sorry, that has been crossed out. So the state parties are in agreement with this determination. That has been removed. So it now reads, if the Director General determines that the event constitutes a public health emergency of international concern, the Director General shall notify all state parties. So two concepts here. One is that the Director General can now act and can now use the IHR if there's a potential public health emergency. And the Director General, the state parties' involvement in determination of a PHEC, public health emergency, has been minimized. Article 13A goes on to say that state parties recognize WHO as the guidance and coordinating authority of international public health response during PHECs and undertake to follow WHO's recommendations in their public health response. So the WHO, this is all new, this is part of the amendment, as the guidance and coordinating authority of international public health response. So just remember, in signing the treaty, you sign on to the IHR. Article 31, digital health documents. This has to do, Article 31 has to do with movement of people and travel. Digital health documents must incorporate means to verify their authenticity via retrieval from an official website, such as a QR code. Must incorporate means to verify authenticity using mechanisms like a QR code. So if persons felt during the pandemic that they got away by forging vaccine passports, which is wrong, well, they will have to think again, because they can't get away once you put in this digital monitoring system. Now, the IHR gets into much more articles dealing with digital transfer of information. And one of the concerns is that that information is now laid bare to non-governmental agencies and manufacturers. So non-governmental agencies like Gavi and so on, they can now use that data to determine a variety of things. For example, vaccine compliance. Article 44, collaboration and assistance. State parties shall collaborate, so undertake to has been removed. State parties shall collaborate and assist each other, in particular developing country state parties upon request in strengthening regional planning, preparedness and response, in close cooperation with WHO regional offices. So it goes on to talk about a compliance committee, national compliance committee, and the appointment of a director as well. I will have to pick that up afterwards in another discussion. Right. They also deal with disinformation, whatever they deem disinformation is. So H in Article 44, this is a new clause, a new statement, in countering the dissemination of false and unreliable information about public health events, preventative and anti-epidemic measures, and activities in the media, social networks, and other ways of disseminating such information. So countries will coordinate with each other and the WHO to counter disinformation. So, for example, throughout the pandemic, no one could share any questions, any queries. You couldn't publicize any queries about the origins of COVID. Otherwise, you were labeled a conspiracy theorist. You couldn't publicize any adverse events. If you spoke about anything, you were censored immediately. For example, we tried to raise issues about myocarditis and surveillance and liability, and that was completely censored through social media and otherwise. But here, this instrument gives WHO to coordinate the censorship of that information by using state apparatus, the government, which has now with a binding agreement. They also talk about the formulation of proposed laws. So they will work with the WHO and other state parties to formulate laws and other legal administrative provisions for the implementation of these regulations. Right, formulation of laws, training, right. Lastly, I think I mentioned the Compliance Committee. This is Article 53. State parties shall establish a compliance committee that shall be responsible for considering all the information submitted by the WHO, monitoring and advising on matters related to compliance. Right. Submitting an annual report to the WHO, that's the Health Assembly, describing the work of the Compliance Committee. Just remember that the pandemic, there's a pandemic period and inter-pandemic period in which you have to put aside resources or dedicate resources for preparing for the next pandemic. And this may include getting pandemic related products and setting in policies and so on. So you have to report to the Health Assembly the work of the Compliance Committee, the concerns regarding non-compliance during the reporting period, and any conclusion recommendations by the committee. Okay, so that's my take so far. Now, what is conspicuously absent in all of this is that there appears to be no provisions for the safe use of pandemic-related products. So the WHO is not talking about liability, it's not talking about compensation, it's not talking about having any kind of mechanisms in place for the surveillance and detection of potential adverse events associated with pandemic-related products. It's almost as if this whole treaty and this whole IHR is configured in such a way so as to enable the manufacturers of pandemic-related products maximum access to the global population using the resources of the state. And it appears to completely protect the manufacturers. Now, it talks about equity as well. So equity to me is like a kind of innuendo. Equity. What is again absent is any mention of evidence-based policy that restrains the restrictions that were placed upon the global population, and locally we had it very hard. Extended lockdowns. There's nothing within these measures in this preparedness plan that prevents the system of coercion and medical segregation that was used to enhance uptake of pandemic-related products. So if you didn't take the product, you didn't have access to public spaces. So there's nothing inside of here, even though there was no evidence base, there's no evidence to suggest that the vaccine was stopping transmission. The WHO, there's no remorse, there's no acknowledgement that something happened internationally. There's no acknowledgement that people, fundamental human rights, their bodily sovereignty was abridged, and that people who exercise that bodily sovereignty, particularly children and young people, whose parents and who themselves may have chosen to perhaps refuse, I would say persons in their 20s, teens and so on, who should have never been exposed to some of these vaccines, that maybe it is because they exercise their bodily autonomy, they may have made a right choice. They may have made a choice that protected their health in the long run. So there's no talk about that at all, and no respect for that. Also, there's no talk to me about protection of children, their education. There's no address on education. In Trinidad and Tobago, we had one of the longest closure of education in-person schooling in the world, and this has resulted in a catastrophic failure in our literacy and school dropouts and so on. So the WHO never really stepped in and said, hold on, guys, maybe you all should not have been closed for so long. Maybe we should have been more judicious in our school closures. And certainly they have not addressed anything about false advertising, which we have illustrated. I don't know if you can see this. I got my COVID vaccine to protect my sister. And there was a raft of false advertising in Trinidad and Tobago that was used to promote uptake. So, and even though there was no evidence that it stopped transmission, and that same false premise, that same false assertion that it stopped transmission was the basis of a medical segregation program, systemic medical segregation. So there's a lot to discuss here, a lot to unpack. This is just a hot take. I encourage the members of the public to go to the TTCAN website or CTAG website. You can get a copy of both the IHR and the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, the Zero Draft. It's important that we look at these documents carefully. You look at the actual document. You can look at somebody's commentary on it, that's fine. But sometimes I think we need to actually, to make sure that we have an accurate understanding and an interpretation, and that we're able to accurately quote, we should all familiarize ourselves with these documents, because we are now tasked to either approve or to refute them. And I think that this is a matter that surely should involve the consent of the citizen, and it should not be a decision that was made on our behalf, to which we are subject to, and which can affect every aspect of our life, our bodily autonomy, our personal freedoms, our freedom to travel, freedom of movement, or access to school and our access to jobs. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. We will talk further in the coming weeks.